DSLR versus mirrorless. What is a DSLR? What is a mirrorless camera? Let's start with the DSLR. The D stands for digital. The SLR stands for single lens reflex. So with film cameras, we'd call it an SLR, a single lens reflex. Now with digital cameras, we call it a digital single lens reflex. To understand what a single lens reflex is, let's first look at a twin lens reflex. Once upon a time, they had cameras that had two lenses, a lens on top and a lens below it, both built into the same camera. Here you can see one of those cameras. Now the top lens would go into a mirror which was angled and then would reflect up to a piece of frosted glass, and you could look through the top of the camera and see the image. The bottom lens actually took the photo, and the light would go through the bottom lens to the film, taking the photograph. So with the twin lens reflex, the top lens was what you viewed through using kind of a periscope type of deal with a mirror and a piece of frosted glass, and then the bottom lens actually took the photograph. Now somebody came up with the idea, what if we put that mirror in front of the lens and we use one lens instead of two, a single lens instead of a twin lens reflex, and if we put that mirror in front of the film, and when we took the picture, it would have a mechanism that would flip it up so it'd be out of the way, it could take the picture, and then it would flip back down after taking the picture so we could look through the lens again. So the mirror in an SLR is angled to reflect the light up to a piece of frosted glass, and then there's a mirror above that that reflects it out through the viewfinder. It works kind of like a periscope in a submarine. So this was a big advancement in photography, the fact you didn't have to have two lenses, and also with the top and the bottom one, you got something called parallax, two parallel views that weren't quite, exactly what they should have been. It was off by just a little bit with the height. And so having a single lens where you had the mirror in front of the lens, flips out of the way to take the picture, comes back down, was an advancement for photography. So that created the single lens reflex. Here we are taking the lens off a digital SLR, and you can see the mirror behind the lens. Pressing the picture taking button in the mirror up mode, you can see the mirror flip up to reveal the shutter. Pressing the button again, the mirror flips back down. Here we have the camera set for a half-second exposure to show how the mirror flips up and the shutter opens to reveal the image sensor and take the photograph, and then closes again. Here you can see a faster exposure which shows how this happens very quickly, the mirror flipping up, the shutter opening up, the shutter closing, and the mirror flipping back down. As we tilt the camera back, you can see the frosted glass above the mirror that the mirror reflects the image onto. There's also a mirror above this glass that's angled to reflect the light from the frosted glass out the viewfinder so you can see the image. Now, when cameras went from film to digital, they became a little bit smaller because you no longer needed room for the film canister, and then also for the take-up roll for the film. So that was able to be eliminated in a digital camera because we no longer needed space, for the film. With digital, we have electronic images and electronic imaging, so the next advancement was to take the mirror out of the camera to be able to see directly through the lens without having to have the mirror in there. So we took out that space that was needed for the mirror and the mechanism to flip it up and down, which actually can make a little bit of vibration when it goes up and down and can also make a little bit of noise. So in this photo, you can see a digital SLR in the top photo and a mirrorless camera in the bottom photo, and you can see the mirrorless camera is able to be much smaller because it doesn't need the mirror. Now some mirrorless cameras will have a flat top and others will still have a pentaprism. Both of them work very well. So taking out the mirror can make the camera body a little bit smaller, and it also allows you to see the exposure in real time. So with a mirrorless camera, basically they took the mirror out. And now we can see directly through the lens, and the biggest advantage there is being able to see not only the subject, but the exposure in real time. With the DSLR, you can see the subject, but you can't see the exposure. With a mirrorless camera, it uses the digital technology to both show you the subject and the exposure at the same time. So there was an advancement going from film to digital. Now there's an advancement going from mirrored cameras to mirrorless. So in our next video, we're going to talk about 10 advantages that a mirrorless camera has over a digital SLR. There are 10 advantages a mirrorless camera has over a digital SLR that you may want to consider if you're buying a new camera. The first one is seeing the exposure in real time as you're taking the photographs so you don't get dark photos by mistake. With the digital SLR, you get to see the subject, but you're not seeing the actual exposure. And there are times when the camera's light meter gets fooled, or when you have the camera set one way and you're now in a new situation, didn't change the exposure that you're shooting away, and then you go to look at them, you go, oh, everything's too light or too dark. And so with a mirrorless camera, you're actually seeing the real exposure that the camera is capturing when you look through the viewfinder, or even when you're looking at the back of the LCD if you're doing it that way. So being able to see both the subject and the exposure at the same time as you're shooting is a really big advantage for a mirrorless camera. Now the second one is for exposure compensation. If you're shooting a photo and you go, gee, I wish that sunset was a little darker, or I wish, the subject has a bright background, wish the subject was a little lighter, you can use exposure compensation to lighten or darken the image. Now with the digital SLR, you have to adjust it and take a picture and see what the picture looks like, adjust it, take another picture, is that a little light, is that light enough, dark enough, and you may have to shoot 2 or 3 shots to get the exposure that looks good or close enough, and then shoot at that exposure. With a mirrorless camera, you see the exposure change in real time, and you can turn the dial right to where it looks good and shoot. So once again, being able to see the exposure in real time, be able to turn the dial and watch the exposure change as you're turning it, much quicker, much easier to do when you're taking photographs. Now here you can see with a mirrorless camera that as we turn the dial, it gets lighter and darker. So if you're somebody who goes, I don't use photo software and I'd like to kind of take care of it when I shoot it, this makes it much easier to adjust the exposure while you're shooting very quickly and easily. And it's much easier to adjust the exposure using this one simple dial than it is to go into your shutter speed and your lens opening and changing those and everything, if all you want to do is make it a little lighter or darker. So using exposure compensation on a mirrorless camera, much easier in real time. You watch it and you just turn it and go, as opposed to having to adjust it. With the digital SLR, shoot, adjust, shoot until you get the exposure, by trying different exposures for the exposure compensation. So exposure compensation, much faster and easier with a mirrorless camera. Now the third advantage is you get to see exposure in real time, and you also get to see the depth of focus change as you change the size of the lens opening. So when you're looking through the camera, you're able to see the depth of focus, the background get more blurred or sharper as you're adjusting the lens opening, which on a digital SLR, you don't see that. But with the mirrorless camera, you can do depth of focus in real time and watch how the background blurs or gets sharper as you're adjusting your lens opening. The fourth advantage is being able to review your images in the viewfinder. Sometimes when you're shooting outdoors and try to review your images on the LCD screen on the back of the camera, the images are washed out and hard to see. With a mirrorless camera, you can review your images by looking in your camera's viewfinder. This is really great, especially when you're trying to review images in bright light outdoors. The fifth advantage is focusing speed. Now in the past, mirrorless cameras didn't focus as fast, but the companies who have invested in that technology have come up with a way to make them focus as fast, and in some cases faster than digital SLR cameras. So there are a lot of sports and action photographers who are going over to mirrorless because of the focusing capabilities on the new mirrorless cameras. Now the sixth advantage is that you get a smaller camera body because you don't need space for the mirror. And so it reduces some of the size and bulk that digital SLRs have because they need the mirror in them. So with mirrorless, you can get a smaller camera body. The seventh advantage is you have better viewing in low light. Whether you're shooting a band at night in a club, whether you're just shooting indoors in low light, you actually see the exposure the camera's seeing, which is generally much lighter than what you would see looking through a digital SLR at the actual light in the room. So a mirrorless camera in low light actually can help you see your subject better because you're seeing the actual exposure, and that is generally lighter than what you're going to see through a DSLR. So being able to see your subject better in low light is the seventh advantage. The eighth advantage is for people who like to shoot using the LCD on the back of the camera. Some people's eyesight and things they don't feel as comfortable looking through the viewfinder. So if you're somebody who likes to shoot using the viewfinder on the back of the camera, if you do it with the DSLR, the mirror has to flip up. There's some things that have to happen. You push the button and there's kind of a delay in it taking the photo. When you do it with a mirrorless camera, everything's already set, there's no delay, and you can shoot very quickly, whether you're shooting using the viewfinder or the LCD on the back of the camera. The ninth advantage is less camera noise when taking photos. Now, when there's no mirror and it isn't actually flipping up and down, you can actually shoot with less camera noise. Here you can hear the sound of the mirror flipping up and down in a digital SLR. Now today, with a lot of digital cameras, when you press the button, it really doesn't make a click sound. It actually has that recorded, so you can hear the click just like it was a mechanical camera, but you can actually turn that off on a mirrorless camera. So if you turn off the click and there's no mirror, you can shoot much more silent than you would with a DSLR. Number 10, there's less shake when you're on a tripod if the mirror isn't flipping up and then flipping down. The mirror flipping up can cause a little bit of vibration in the camera when you have it on the tripod doing scenic shots and things. Having a camera without a mirror, there's no motion going on, so it helps your camera be steadier on the tripod. Now, remember reading an article a few years ago where somebody said digital SLRs are going away and mirrorless cameras are going to replace them. And I said, no. I said, I love my digital SLR. I'm never going to do, whatever that mirrorless, all that stuff. I'm going to stay with my DSLR. Now, the thing is, after talking with other photographers about mirrorless and doing some research, I discovered there are some really great advantages that a mirrorless has over a DSLR. Now, both DSLRs and mirrorless cameras take great photographs. So this is just some information for your consideration to help you get the best camera for you. One of the biggest questions people ask when they're buying a new digital camera is, how big of an image sensor do I need? And a lot of people ask, well, if I'm going professional, if I want to take professional photos and make money, charge money for them, how big of an image sensor do I need? Well, one of the simplest answers is to download our image sensor size chart, and we have the top row going from full frame down to 4/3, and any of those sensors are considered professional sensors, and you can take professional photographs with them. The second row goes from 1 inch to sensors smaller than 1 inch. Now, when you talk about taking professional photographs, there are people who take professional photos with their cell phone that create some amazing images that they sell online, created with their cell phone. I was at a small town farmer's market where they had, different booths selling vegetables and fruits and arts and crafts and things. And as I'm walking around, I noticed one booth had some, pottery and some art stuff, as well as some photographs on one wall of the booth, kind of had a hanging display of some beautiful nature photographs. And I mean, these were really, really good. They were top notch. And so I stopped and talked to the woman for a little bit, and she was an artist who also enjoyed photography. And so, we're talking. I go, can I ask what kind of camera you used? And she goes, oh, just this little thing. And she pulled out, it was probably about a 5 or 6 year old little point and shoot camera. Nothing special, just a little point and shoot with a small image sensor. But she was creating beautiful photographs with it. So it isn't all about the technical, is this technical perfection? Do I need a 5-pound lens with a 3-pound camera body? Do I need to drag 8 pounds, with additional lenses, 10 or more pounds around with me? Or can I shoot with a smaller camera? The artistry is what happens in front of the camera as much as what happens inside the camera. And so finding great lighting, angle, composition, framing, placement, just perspective, all these different things that happen in front of the camera. She had trained as an artist, and she had a creative eye. She had an artistic eye, and that was what made her photographs great. So it isn't always about how big's my image sensor size. It's more about the artist behind the camera. And if you're going, okay, but technically, what do I need? Well, if you want to get really technical, it's probably the top row from full frame to APS-C to 4/3. If you're shooting the bottom row, you can still shoot professionally. You can still charge for your photographs because it's more about the photograph and how good it is, not just the technical aspects of how big is my image sensor. So the simple answer is go with the top row. The real answer is any size image sensor, including a cell phone, can create photographs that people will want to buy. Image stabilization is one of my favorite features on camera bodies and camera lenses. There are camera bodies that have image stabilization built into the body, which actually helps stabilize the image sensor when you're hand holding the camera. There are also lenses that have image stabilizers built into them, which help stabilize the camera when hand holding as well. Most digital cameras call this image stabilization. You will sometimes see the abbreviation IS on a lens. Nikon cameras call image stabilization vibration reduction, so it's just a different name for the same thing. On Nikon cameras, you may see the abbreviation VR. When hand-holding a camera, you have a chance of getting camera movement. Camera movement will cause the entire image to be blurred, and I teach Photoshop, I teach Lightroom, I teach other photo software. I will tell you that if the image is blurred from camera motion, it's pretty much blurred. You lost all the sharpness. So you want to hold the camera very steady when you're taking a photo, do a very smooth press on the picture taking button, and you want a high enough ISO to make sure you have a fast enough shutter speed, but having image stabilization built into the camera body and built into the lens, it really helps you to avoid camera motion. And this is also really great for older people whose hands may not be as steady as they once were, who still love taking photographs, but could use a little bit of help steadying the camera while they're holding it. So if you're giving a camera as a gift to somebody who's a little bit older, or you're a little bit older and you're going, I'd like to take photos, and I'd like that image stabilization, I'd like a little help, hand holding the camera, keeping it steady, you may want to consider cameras with image stabilization either in the body or the lens or both. Sometimes there are lenses that are sold with image stabilization in one version and without it in another, and it's more expensive with it, but usually it's with longer lenses, and usually it's a good idea if you can afford it. It really helps you get sharper images by avoiding camera movement, which will blur your image. So image stabilization in the camera body and the camera lens helps you avoid camera blur and also helps you shoot at slower shutter speeds and still get a sharp image. When you buy a digital camera, you generally get 3 lens choices. The first is the regular lens that it comes with. It's a wide angle to short telephoto. Now the problem with this lens is it doesn't zoom out very far. And if you're trying to shoot sports or you're on vacation, you really want to zoom in on something, you kind of go, well, this doesn't zoom out very much. So that is kind of a limitation of just getting that single, the kit lens, they call it, the one that just, comes standard with the camera. So your second choice is to get the 2 zoom lens kit. And that's where you get the camera body and 2 lenses. One of them is that first one. It goes from wide angle to short telephoto. And the second one goes from short telephoto to long telephoto. So with the first one, you can go wide angle to short telephoto, but you must put the second one on if you really want to zoom out to capture something. Now the problem with the 2 lens set is when you want a wide angle shot, you always have the telephoto on. When you want to really zoom out, you've got the lens that doesn't zoom out that far. So you're always having to change lenses. You always have to carry the second lens. And when you're changing lenses, there's a chance you're going to be getting some dust on the image sensor. So most camera manufacturers do offer a 2 lens set, and it is an economical way to get started, but it can be kind of inconvenient. When I talk to people in my workshops, I suggest that they consider an all-in-one lens. And the people in the workshop who have had a 2 lens set and then gone to an all-in-ones go, yes, that is great, that is so great, it's one of the best things I ever did. It just makes life so much easier when I'm taking photos. So an all-in-one lens goes from wide angle to long telephoto. It covers that whole range in one lens. So you can be traveling and shooting a really wide angle shot and then zooming in and zooming as long as the lens will go and then anywhere in between. With a 2 lens set, you always have to have that, carry that second lens with you. You're always changing lenses, and it just makes life so much more convenient with an all-in-one lens. Now, if you have an interchangeable lens camera, an SLR, or a mirrorless camera, most manufacturers that I know do offer an all-in-one lens. Now here you can see an all-in-one lens zoomed in and zoomed out. You can see when it's zoomed out, it zooms out pretty darn far. So when you buy your camera, you can buy it with the wide angle to short telephoto, which is going to kind of limit you. You can buy it with the wide angle to short telephoto and then the short telephoto to long telephoto 2 lens set, which is a little bit inconvenient, but it's a good way to start. It's a more economical way to start. Or you can buy the camera body with an all-in-one lens, which is a lot more convenient when taking photos. Now, sometimes you will have a choice of all-in-one lenses, one that will go from wide angle to, sort of long telephoto, and another that will go from wide angle to really long telephoto. So you may want to look at the choice for that. Do I want the wide angle to a medium telephoto or the wide angle to a long telephoto is another choice that you can make. Now, all-in-one lenses usually cost around $600, so that's $600 in addition to probably the $500 or more that you're spending on your camera body. So if you can't afford that right then, you might start with the 2-lens set. If you can afford it, you may want to get the body plus the all-in-one lens. One lens that I would suggest you consider getting is a large opening lens. A large opening lens gives you a bigger opening, which helps you blur the heck out of the background, helps you shoot in low light, and also, since it lets in more light, it helps you use a faster shutter speed, which helps you stop action indoors. Now, to get a large opening lens, you can buy it as a zoom lens or a prime lens. A zoom lens zooms in and out from different focal lengths. A prime lens doesn't zoom. Now, if you buy a zoom lens with a large opening, it's usually going to cost you $1,400 to $2,600 or more. Now, if you're looking for a more cost-effective way to get that large opening lens to be able to blur the background, shoot in low light, and help stop action in low light, you may want to consider getting a prime lens instead. You can get a prime lens with a large opening for about $250. Now, when you are looking at prime lenses with large openings, a lot of times you'll see the same lens millimeter in a 1.4 versus a 1.8 opening. Now, 1.4 lenses are usually double or almost triple the cost of a 1.8 lens. Usually the 1.4 lenses are also a little heavier, so if you'd like to save some money and go with a little lighter weight lens, you may want to choose the 1.8. Now, when you look at the prime lens that's the same millimeter with a 1.4 and a 1.8 version online, you'll see that both of them generally get 5 stars each, so they're both great lenses. Now, if you decide, I want to go with the 1.4, I want to spend more money, but I feel I'm getting a better lens, you can. But if you go with the 1.8, you're still getting a great lens and you're saving money. But you can look these up online and do all your research and decide how you'd like to go. I own a 1.8 lens that's one of my favorites and does an incredible job. Now, a zoom lens zooms and a prime lens doesn't zoom, so you aren't going to be zooming in, wider or narrower views. You're going to have to walk nearer or farther from the subject to be able to change the view of the subject. Now, with prime lenses, you have 3 basic choices: wide angle, normal, or telephoto. A wide angle lens generally shows a view wider than your eyes normally see. A normal lens shows pretty much what your eyes normally see, and a telephoto lens shows a narrower view that brings the subject closer. For fashion and portraiture, the telephoto lens has always been the beauty lens, and if you want to photograph people, I suggest you may want to consider a telephoto lens for your prime lens with a large opening. A telephoto lens helps show less background, helps blur the background. It just does all sorts of neat things that we talk about in my creative photography workshop. So a telephoto lens, if you're photographing people, one that I really recommend. Now, it does have a narrower view, so you won't be doing wide-angle shots indoors of full family groups. You'll have your zoom lens for that will go out to wide angle, but it is a great lens for people, also for travel and nature photographs too. Now, normal lenses usually cost around $250 for the 1.8 version. If you buy a telephoto lens, it's going to cost more, towards $500 for the 1.8 version, so a telephoto prime lens will cost more than a normal prime lens. Now, I know some people love doing wide-angle photographs, so you may want to consider a wide-angle lens as well. Now, when I want to take a really wide-angle shot, I usually do stitching. Stitching is where you take multiple photographs and then stitch them together in photo software. So after taking the first photograph, I will take the second photograph overlapping about 1/3 of the image, and then the next photograph overlapping about 1/3 of that. Take them all, put them into photo software, and it goes and puts them all together, and all of a sudden you have this really wide angle shot that was done by combining multiple images. Now, you can take stitching photographs handheld. You don't need a tripod. And if you wanted to, you could do 360 degrees of that. So if you're ever going hiking or something and going, I want this really, wide shot, but I'm only seeing this much through my camera, you may want to try stitching, where you take multiple photographs and then put them all together to get that really wide panorama of the scene that you want to capture. Now, when you're looking to buy a wide angle, a normal, or a telephoto lens, it can get a little confusing because of the different image sensor sizes. Lenses are based on their measurements that they had with film cameras. So if you have a full-frame image sensor in your digital camera, it will be 1:1 because a full-frame image sensor is the same size as a 35mm negative. If you have an APS-C sensor, you need to use a 1.5 magnification, so you multiply the lens size by 1.5. If you have a 4/3 image sensor in your digital camera, You will need to multiply the lens size by 2. So if you have a full-frame camera, a 24mm is a wide-angle lens, a 50mm is a normal lens, and a 100mm is a telephoto lens. If you have an APS-C image sensor in your digital camera, you'll need to multiply the millimeter on the lens by 1.5. So a 16mm times 1.5 is 24. So if you want a 24mm equivalent with an APS-C, you buy a 16mm. A 50mm would be about a 35mm times 1.5 is like 52, but that lens can get a little more expensive. So if you're looking for around a normal lens with an APS-C image sensor size, I might suggest the 50mm, often called the Nifty 50, and it's about $250 for the 1.8 version. If you have an APS-C image sensor and you want a telephoto lens, you may want to consider the 85mm, which times 1.5 makes it a 127mm telephoto lens. Now if you have a 4/3 camera and you want a wide-angle lens to get a 24mm wide-angle lens, you would want to buy a 12mm lens, which 2 times 12 is 24. If you wanted a normal lens, you would buy a 25mm lens and times the 2 times magnification factor, 25 times 2 equals 50 to get you a 50mm normal lens. Now if you want a telephoto, you might buy the 45mm, which times the 2 times magnification would give you a 90mm view, or a 60mm, which times 2 would give you a 120mm telephoto lens. Now you can also buy wider lenses than 24mm and longer lenses than 100mm, so you can look and see which lens you like the best. So if you want to be able to really blur the background, if you want help taking photos in low light, or helping you stop action indoors, a large opening lens is a great idea. Why does the magnification factor change with different image sensor sizes? Well, the first thing we have to know is that all lenses are based on film cameras. If it was 100mm with a film camera, it's 100mm. If it was a 200mm with a film camera, it's a 200mm. Now the full frame image sensor for a full frame camera is based on the size of a 35mm negative. So a full frame sensor is the same size that film was. So when you put a 100mm lens on a camera with a full frame sensor, it's a 1-to-1. That 100mm lens is a 100mm lens on a full frame sensor because that's the same size as a film negative. Now if you put that same 100mm lens on an APS-C sensor, it's a smaller image sensor size, so it gets a 1.5 magnification. So that 100mm lens on a digital camera with an APS-C size sensor will now become a 150mm lens. If you put that same 100mm lens on a 4/3 camera, you will get a 2 times magnification factor. So putting a 100mm lens on a 4/3 camera, it will become a 200mm lens. So if you have a 100mm lens and you put it on a digital camera with a full frame image sensor, it will be 100mm. If you put that same lens on a camera that has an APS-C image sensor, you'll need to multiply by 1.5, which means you'll have a 150mm view. If you put a 100mm lens on a 4/3 camera, you'll need to multiply by 2, which means that 100mm lens will give you a 200mm view. I am told that my cell phone in my pocket actually has more computing power than all those rooms full of huge computers that were used to send a man to the moon. So technology will make things faster and better and smaller. Since digital cameras were introduced years ago, they've really improved in quality of the technology, of the image sensors, of so many things. So as with anything in technology, it's become better and smaller. There have been great strides taken in technology for digital cameras in the last 5 and 10 years, and even in the last year or two, it's incredible what's happened with the quality in a digital camera. Here you can see 3 different digital cameras, a full frame, APS-C, and 4/3. You will notice that the APS-C is a little bit smaller than the full frame, but that the 4/3 camera is much smaller than the full frame camera. Now with the larger image sensor means larger lenses. A 70 to 200 lens on a full frame digital camera is heavy. And it gets heavy very quickly when you're shooting with it. It's also very heavy to carry in your camera bag. And there are cameras sitting on shelves because people go, it's too big, it's too heavy, I don't feel like taking with me, even to a soccer game. But if they're going traveling, they're going, I'm going to leave that at home. That's really heavy to carry around all day. I'd rather just shoot with my cell phone. So you may want to consider that technology has come to the point where you can actually get professional photographs with a 4/3 camera. There are professionals shooting weddings and scenics and travel and fashion with 4/3 cameras. So being able to carry a smaller camera and smaller lens, which is lighter weight, takes up less space, is more convenient. A lot of people are going to that instead of the full frame because the technology, the image sensors, the processing, all of that has gotten to a point where a 4/3 image sensor can take professional photographs. There are a lot of photographers who have carried the heavy equipment, those big lenses and everything, and who are going over to 4/3 because they're going, it's about getting the photograph. And this technology and this size sensor gets me the photo, gets me a professional one, and I don't have to carry all that weight and all those things with me. So you may want to consider a 4/3 camera if you don't like carrying really big, heavy equipment. So if you haven't bought a digital camera yet, for the fact that it's mirrorless and it's much smaller with a really great image sensor, does professional quality photographs, I'm going to suggest that you take a look at the 4/3 cameras. Going forward, as technology gets even better and better and better, I'm thinking that the 4/3 cameras will become the next advancement in digital photography. We went from film to digital, we've gone from DSLR to mirrorless, and I think the next advancement is going to be going with smaller image sensors that get the same great quality because of new technology, but you don't have to have that great big heavy camera with those great big heavy lenses. There are professional photographers who have sold their other equipment to go 4/3 because of the lighter weight, the smaller size, and the convenience, and that they get the shot they need, but they don't need that big, heavy equipment. So it's just something you might want to consider when you're looking at buying a digital camera. When looking for a new digital camera, a lot of people spend a lot of time looking at all the technical specifications for the camera they're buying, and that's where a lot of their time and energy is spent. For me, it's more about the category of the camera that fits your lifestyle, what you want to do with it first, and then look at the technical. Now, the thing is about technical settings, if you can buy a camera, no matter how new it is to the market, it's old technology. Because new technology is already on the drawing board, camera manufacturers have plans 5 and 10 years out. So the technology, by the time you can buy it, is actually old technology, and new technology is on the drawing board and will appear in the camera they come out with next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So going completely by, okay, latest, greatest technology, it's going to fade pretty quickly because we're talking technology. Now, there were some incredible photographs made for fashion covers, for travel photographs, for weddings, for families, for nature photos using 10-year-old technology 10 years ago. Because that's the newest, latest technology they had then, but right now it's 10-year-old technology. And the technology in the camera you can buy today will be old technology 10 years from now. The thing is, a great photographer uses the technology that they have. And so great covers of magazines, incredible photographs were taken, like I say, 10 years ago with 10-year-old technology. So when you're looking to buy a digital camera, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on, okay, this is the latest and greatest technology, because there's better technology coming along. And I usually tell people, especially if you're buying a camera where you can take the lens off of it, every 3 to 5 years, replace the camera body and you replace the technology with new technology. So going completely with which one has the best technology, if you really want to do that, you can, but understand the technology you buy right now is going to become old technology very quickly. So the first thing I would do in buying a digital camera is find the category that fits you best. Are you going point and shoot? Are you going DSLR? Are you going mirrorless? Are you going with a large sensor, a medium, or a small sensor? How long of a lens do you want to zoom? So there are some very important considerations for finding the best camera for you and how you want to use it. So after you've made those decisions, then you may want to look at the technology, comparing different brands and different models within that category, and with all the other different decisions you've made, looking at the cameras that fit that, and see who has the technology that you like the best. But I wouldn't start out just looking at technology. I would narrow it down to the type of the camera that you want and all the other things, and then look at technology for the ones that fit that category. We hope you've enjoyed these photography tips. If you'd like help getting started with your digital camera, you may want to check out our Top 10 Digital Camera Settings worksheet. Looking at your digital camera, there are lots of buttons and symbols and settings which can be confusing. Our Top 10 Digital Camera Settings worksheet will help you learn where these settings are on your camera and the buttons and dials you must use to set them. This worksheet is a great way to get started learning your digital camera. Being able to look at your digital camera and know what the different settings are and how to set them is a great feeling. Knowledge is always your best camera accessory. Download the Top 10 Digital Camera Settings worksheet at easyphotoclass.com to start learning your digital camera settings today. To go to our website, click on our logo at the top of the page for great photography downloads and workshops. To subscribe to our channel, click on our logo in the lower left to enjoy more great photography videos. You can also click on the video image in the lower right to enjoy our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk with you soon.